Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of our Project Zomboid Masterclass. And this one took a long time to prepare. Hell, it took so long I actually managed to set up my own farm back on my windowsill. See? There's a little lettuce sprout right over there. Yay! But yeah, today we're gonna cover the topic of farming. Farming, which went through a massive overhaul as part of Build 42, and we're gonna dive into all the changes and how to be an effective farmer. So pull out your notebooks because this one is gonna be long and full of information. Welcome to Growing Pro. But before we dig into the soil and start planting our seeds, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to all of you guys who watch and interact with the videos. There is more than 180 of you that subscribe to the channel, which is mind-blowing to me, and I wanted to say I appreciate you all. So, let's get on with farming. So let's start by saying that it's actually no longer farming. The skill was renamed to agriculture. And it's a skill allowing the player to sow seeds and create sustainable way to gather food. And this is one of the biggest changes. Agriculture is also influenced by the season system, meaning crops will grow better in their preferred seasons and have more problems or refuse to grow in seasons that do not match. Now, this was not part of Build 41. Previously, you were able to grow any kind of plant anytime during the year. Strawberries in December? No problem.
How about no?
So sowing season is where we're gonna start the video. The sowing season starts in March, goes all the way through till October, and technically you are able to plant any kind of a plant outside of the sowing season, but basically they're just gonna die, so it makes no sense. Now, this does not mean that you can just simply spawn your character in July and find the nearest farm and just sow every single plant and every single seed you find. You see, plants have specific windows in which it actually makes sense to plant them. So the base game has a total of 65 different plants that you can plant. I'm not gonna go over the sowing season for each one. You can find that information easily on PZWiki. Now, I started this character specifically to deep dive into agriculture and give you guys the entire experience. You will notice at the top right corner of the screen that it's actually 5th of March, which is the beginning of the sowing season, and we're gonna kick off with sowing the first plants. Most of you that do have the default July start will have a slightly different experience, but that's okay. I mean, the mechanics apply anytime you start. Now, you probably already saw that I have a bunch of different seed packets. I'm going to talk about where to find seeds later on in the video. But first, let's start with the first plants. I picked carrots and onions as these are the only ones which have a bonus when planted in March. And the process of seeding is super easy. You need to dig a furrow. I recommend having any kind of a spade, a shovel, a garden shovel. Even small ones. You don't want to do it with your hands because you might get, well, hurt. Now you can see that my farming area is pretty well equipped already. I mean, that was weeks in advance of preparation for the sowing season as my character started in February. Now, side note, this backpack sprayer is absolutely amazing. It has 16 liters capacity, very useful. And sowing is super easy. You need to have the seeds in your inventory. You need to right click on the furrow and just select the seed you want to sow. You will notice once you hover over a particular plant that it's going to tell you in the tooltip which is the best month to sow a particular plant and which is the worst month. I would strongly recommend to follow these because if you don't, you will either have a really low yield or your plant will die. Now, and as mentioned earlier, I went with onions and carrots as these are the only two plants that have a bonus for being planted in March. And once you plant the seeds, there are a few steps you need to follow in order to have your plant grow and grow efficiently. So the three things which are required for efficient farming are water, sunlight, and some form of plant nutrition like a fertilizer or compost, or both. Now, I wanted to spend some time talking about fertilizing or composting your crops because I think that's a game mechanic which is not really super clear. So if you add a fertilizer to your crop, what it's gonna do is it's gonna first remove 20 hours of the current growth cycle. Now, I'm gonna cover growth cycles and plant health later on during the video. Also, the first application of the fertilizer will increase the plant's health by 20%. Now, if you add a fertilizer to a plant which has already been fertilized, it's going to remove 25% of the plant's health. And on top of that, it will not speed up the growth. So effectively, what's going to happen is you will damage your plant by applying fertilizer. So Gertrix, why use fertilizer? Maybe we should just use compost. And what are the differences between the two? And that's a great question. You see, compost works just like the fertilizer does, with one difference. It does not give that health penalty if you apply it multiple times to a single plant. And if you come to a conclusion that you're just going to use compost and forget about fertilizer, well, that's not entirely good approach, because compost and fertilizer are stackable. So you might want to use both, but just remember which plant was fertilized using artificial fertilizer in order not to damage it. And how to get compost in the first place? Well, you start by hitting carpentry level 3, because that's when you unlock the possibility of building your own composter. And once that's done, you just place any kind of perishable food inside and let it rot over there for a certain period of time. Once the food inside the composter fully rots, and you have a sack, you just right click on your composter and you select the option to collect compost. Now each compost bag is good enough for 4 applications. So do the math in your head. If you have a crop with 8 plants, you need 2 full bags of compost. Okay, so now let's cover the concept of plant health, because it's really important to understand the overall agriculture mechanics within Project Zomboid. Now, anytime you plant a new plant, the base health that this plant will start with is set at 50. Now, during the plant's life cycle, this number will vary between 0 to 100. Now, there are multiple factors which will impact the development of this number, both in a positive and a negative way. So, looping back to what I've said about the fertilizer, when you fertilize a freshly planted plant, you will add an additional 20% of health to the plant. So once we look at the factors which either increase or decrease the health of your plants, you will notice that a lot of them are actually not controllable by the player. I mean, you cannot control sunlight unless you use cheats, but if you play like a normal game, you cannot control if it's sunny or not. Now, you cannot control rain, and within build 42, you have a mechanic which actually causes the plants to lose health if they are overwatered. Which I think is actually a pretty cool mechanic, because it's very easy to kill a plant if you just, pour too much water over it. But these are the things you need to take into consideration. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details, because there are plants which cannot be overwatered, like carrots, for example. And also, an idea for plants which can be easily killed by overwatering is simply growing them inside a greenhouse. You can build a greenhouse, right? And this way you can control the amount of water that is being delivered to various plants. So if you're ever wondering, why did my plant die? I've done everything right. I applied compost. I was checking for disease and they still died. Well, maybe they were simply overwatered and you were just unlucky. And now the last thing that impacts your plant's health are plant's diseases. And there are 3 types of them: mildew, flies, and devil's water fungi. Now each one of them has a separate mechanic that's going to impact your plant. Mildew will reduce the speed at which the plant is growing. Flies, on the other hand, will cause the plant to lose more water every single interval, while the fungi will reduce the yield that the plant is going to give you at the harvest period. Now, each disease can be cured. The first 2, you can make specific sprays that will kill these diseases. You are able to make these sprays if you either have the crop farmer trait or you find one of the magazines. And for the fungi, on the other hand, in order to get rid of them, you actually need to reduce the plant's water level to less than 90% of the required amount. That's actually the only way to cure it. Pretty interesting mechanic. And how to tell if my plant is sick? Well, the easiest way is just to hit level 6 and right-click info, and then you'll know. But it's not easy to hit level 6. So the first indication would be this brownish color. You will notice on this example that some of the plants have a slightly different color. There's definitely something wrong with them. It's just we don't know what. And since we don't know what's wrong, it's hard to apply the right cure. Now, one thing I didn't know before I started recording this video is that there is actually a disease spread mechanic, and it means that if one plant catches a disease, there is a risk that it's gonna spread to neighboring plants, and you want to keep spaces between them in order to avoid that, which I didn't do. And this is how it should look like, theoretically. So keep that in mind when planning your space. Now, the last piece of theory that you need to know is that plants have their growing stages. There are actually 5 different stages of growth for every plant. These stages are seedling, young, almost ready to harvest, and the final stage is seed bearing, where when you harvest a plant, you will not only harvest the actual plant, so like a fresh tomato, but you will also be able to collect seeds for future sowing. And why is it important to understand that there are stages to your plant growth? Well, the most simple answer is because composting counts per stage. So for any plant, theoretically, you should be applying compost up to 6 times at every single phase if you want to speed up the growth and kind of, just do it the right way. So from this perspective, farming is definitely not a fire and forget type of a skill where you just plant your tomatoes back in May and harvest them in August. There is actually a lot of maintenance that you need to do by checking the water levels, checking if every single stage has been properly treated with compost. You need to come back to your plants every other day just to be sure. I mean, you might not do that, but then your agriculture will not be super efficient. And what kind of sucks in all of this is none of it actually gives you XP. The only thing that gives you experience points is harvesting, and actually harvesting only what you have planted yourself. So I had this idea in order to level up agriculture fast. I found this really cool plant shop. It's between Echo Creek and Irvington, and I figured I'm gonna go there. There are plants planted at the start of the game, and I'm just gonna harvest them. I won't need to wait for all of my carrots and onions to mature. And I did. And it didn't give me any experience points. And that became super frustrating. Okay, so let's talk about leveling up agriculture and at which point your skill level is sufficient enough to be fully capable of doing pretty much everything you want with your plants. And as you can see, every even level of skill that you hit is going to open up more information about your plants, any plants actually, when right-clicking on them. Now, the sweet spot you want to hit is level 6, because at level 6, you are able to see if the plant has any kind of a disease and apply the right cure, right? I mean, we've discussed that earlier. Now, before level 6, there is really no intelligent way of telling what happens to your plant. Now, I was trying to figure out if there are some, like visual indications, but at least I wasn't able to find any. So if some of you know how to differentiate mildew from flies, please let me know in the comments, because that's going to be super valuable for all of us watching this video. So with leveling up agriculture, there aren't many shortcuts available. There are 2 things you can do to increase your base skill level early in the game. One would be watching Life and Living. Specifically on day 2 at 6 p.m. there is a show dedicated to agriculture. The other one is episode 3 of Exposure Survival, which also gives you farming XP. Now, beyond that, there isn't anything you can do apart from just, patience and waiting for your plants to grow and harvesting them. Now, the good thing about agriculture is that, once your plants are ready to harvest and you harvest them, it does yield quite a substantial amount of XP, especially if you read the skill books first. And also, it's a skill, that's just kind of natural if you're going for the long-term survival. Granted, some of your plants will die. You just need to take that into consideration when planning out your space, your crops. And eventually you're going to get to that level 6, which will give you the entirety of information required to fully take care of your plants. And obviously, it does yield food. In some cases, quite a substantial amount of food. Now, the downside of all the fruits and vegetables you harvest is that they perish. So you need to have ways which will allow you to preserve them for longer than just a couple of days. And this is where my next video is gonna be super useful for you guys, because we're gonna cover topics related to food preservation, both which are available in the vanilla game and also some mods which add extra features to the game. So stay tuned for that. This is gonna be a really interesting episode, especially for those of you who are really going for those long-term, multi-year survival games. And while Frankie harvests the rest of these plants, I'm just gonna digress for a moment. I honestly really like the look of the crops, especially when the plants are ready to harvest. It just kind of gives you this nice vibe. You remember in my previous video about animals, I was super excited by animals and I liked that mechanic in game, but I think farming is just as rewarding. It's something that I really enjoy. Now, a few more things that are worth knowing about agriculture before we close today's video. One is that you can actually move soil between places and effectively create space for growing your crops pretty much anywhere you'd want. Now, the only thing you need is actually a shovel, a sack, and access to dirt, access to soil. You can collect dirt and move it from place to place, pretty much the same way as you would do with sand or gravel. And this dirt can be turned into a furrow and actually, you know, kind of used as crops. So this could be super useful for those of you crazy people who live in Louisville, which scares the, not gonna say what out of me. But yeah, you can actually create crops on rooftops, on balconies, you name it. And the other thing I wanted to mention, which I promised I will mention at the very beginning of the video, is where to find seeds. Well, seeds are super easy to come by. You can find them in sheds next to farming areas. You can find them in supermarkets, in dedicated plant shops. And also, and this is going to be a shameless plug, you can also forage seeds. If you would watch my foraging video, you would notice that one of the byproducts of foraging and grabbing wild vegetables or fruit, which you can find in fields and forests, is you can also collect seeds for those. So make sure to check that one out as well. Now, I wanted to close today's video a bit of a different way. You see, I really enjoy making these videos. This whole channel is kind of a hobby project of mine, and still it feels pretty insane that more than 180 people actually decided to subscribe to the channel and wait for new videos to drop. And I'm not gonna lie, I mean, it feels pretty amazing. You guys probably can see me smiling. What I wanted to do is I wanted to invite you guys to a Discord community that I will create. I want to create a space where we can talk about Project Zomboid and also other games, share some ideas for videos, ask questions, and just, you know, hang out and have a good time. So I'm gonna drop a link in the description of the video. Want to get in touch, talk about video games and anything that comes to your mind, yeah, feel free to hop on. Let's keep this rolling. And with that, I'm gonna close today's video. This was the longest masterclass episode I've made, probably the most detailed one as well. I really hope you found it informative, and yeah, stay tuned for more. And as always, guys, I'm Gertrix. Cheers.